Congratulations on the car, my son. My father's glass clinked loudly at the head of the dinner table, his voice booming with pride. My brother grinned like a golden trophy, his new keys dangling from his fingers, glinting under the chandelier. The whole table laughed. Clapped. Even my mother wiped a tear and whispered, "He deserves it." And then he turned to me. His voice dropped in tone, in warmth. "The rent is due on Sunday. 800 reis. It's way past time you act like an adult." Just like that, the celebration became a courtroom. And I wasn't invited to the party. I was sentenced at it. My name is Lena, and from wherever you're watching this, stay with me. Have you ever sat at a table where love was served on one plate and judgment was dropped in front of you like scraps? Because that night, I wasn't just forgotten. I was targeted. No applause. No pride. Just a financial invoice delivered like a birthday card. I didn't respond. I didn't scream or cry. I didn't argue or plead. I just stood up, quietly. I cleared my plate. Took one last look at the home I helped keep afloat, the one where I cooked meals when mom was sick, stayed up helping my brother study, paid half the bills when dad lost his job, and I went to my room. I packed a duffel bag. My laptop. My documents. My dreams. Then I wrote a note and stuck it to the fridge. Don't worry about the rent. I won't be here Sunday. Or ever again. And I disappeared. No dramatic exit. No door slamming. Just absence. You see, what they never realized, what they refused to see, was that I had been acting like an adult for years. When they wanted peace, I swallowed mine. When they needed money, I gave up mine. When they broke things, I fixed them. But I was never seen. My brother? He failed 2 semesters, got bailed out with private tutoring and a new car. Me? I got scolded for being too quiet, for not smiling enough, for not being as bright as him. But I didn't leave out of spite. I left because I was done auditioning for respect in my own family. That night, I checked into a cheap guest house on the other side of town. A concrete room with peeling walls and a window that didn't quite close, but it was mine. No footsteps outside my door. No shouts about how much I owed. No sudden power cuts because no one paid the bill. I laid on the stiff mattress, stared at the ceiling, and for the first time in months, breathed. I was supposed to feel guilt. Instead, I felt weightless. Over the next few weeks, I worked quietly, picked up more shifts at the cafe, started freelancing online, sold my old clothes, my unused guitar, even the textbooks I once bought to tutor my brother for free. I stayed silent until the messages began. "Where did you go? Mom's been crying. This isn't like you, Lena. Come home. Dad said you're being dramatic. We need your help with the bills." Ah, now they remembered me. Now I wasn't invisible. I was missed. But I wasn't theirs anymore. Because something was happening. Something they didn't know. I wasn't just surviving. I was building. And when I returned, they wouldn't recognize the version of me walking through that door. They thought I'd fold. That I'd crawl back home once reality hit. Tired, broke, ashamed. They pictured me sleeping on benches, begging for help, learning my lesson like a child who wandered too far from the fire. But they didn't know that walking away from them wasn't the beginning of my fall. It was the beginning of my rise. The tiny guest house I moved into, it became a sanctuary. The walls were bare. The bed creaked. The shower barely had water pressure. But no one shouted my name from the hallway. No one banged on my door to ask where their socks were or why I hadn't cooked. Every silence was mine. I worked 3 jobs, part-time at the cafe, freelance copywriting for a small startup, and online language tutoring at night. It was brutal, but every hour I worked was for me. Not for the family name. Not to cover my brother's mess. Not to be noticed. Just me. And that was enough. I started waking up before the sun. Took my tea on the rooftop. Watched the city yawn and stretch below me. I wrote in a journal. Something I hadn't done since my father once said, "Why waste time writing things no one reads?" Now, I was writing everything. Not for them, for me. Meanwhile, at home, the silence grew heavier. My cousin sent me a message. "Your dad's been in a mood lately. Keeps asking where you went. Then another. Your mom asked me if you're okay. She's telling people you're on vacation. Vacation? Sure. If they meant working 14 hours a day and folding my laundry in a shared bathroom stall. But I didn't correct her. Let her live in the story she told the neighbors. Because while she played victim to her friends, I was earning dignity, the one they never handed me at that dinner table. 2 months after I left, I had enough saved for a security deposit. A one-bedroom apartment on the second floor of an old building. Cracked tiles, loud pipes, but sunlight in the living room and a quiet neighbor who offered me lemons from her window garden. I signed the lease in silence. Then I stood in the middle of the room and whispered to the empty space. Welcome home, Lena. No keys gifted by a proud father. No congratulations toast. But also no conditions. No lectures. No quiet reminders that I was never the chosen one. Just the sound of my name belonging to the doorbell. That weekend, I passed my brother on the street. He didn't see me. He was driving the car. The one Dad had toasted over. Music loud. Window down. A girl in the passenger seat with her legs on the dashboard. He looked carefree. But his eyes? They were shadowed. Not the glow of someone secure, but the burn of someone living off borrowed luck. That car? Already registered late. Insurance unpaid. Tires thinning. I knew because I saw the bills before I left. They were in my name. So I smiled quietly, crossed the street, and disappeared into the crowd. Because what they didn't know was this. I wasn't just gone. I was becoming undeniable. And when the lights flickered back on in their world, they'd see the shadow of the girl they dismissed. And she'd be standing taller than they ever imagined. It started with a phone call. Blocked number. I almost didn't answer. But something in my gut said, pick up. Hello. Heavy breathing. Then a voice I hadn't heard in 2 months, thinner than I remembered. Lena, it's your mother. I didn't say anything. I just let her fill the silence she used to hand to me, like punishment. Your father had to sell the car. Ah. So that's why she was calling. We're having a hard time with the rent. Prices went up. Your brother's looking for work, but... She trailed off. I could almost hear her pride unraveling, stitch by stitch. We were wondering if you could help out. Just until we catch our breath. I closed my eyes. Just until we catch our breath. Where was this kindness when I was suffocating in that house? Where was this pause when I begged for peace and got invoices instead? I'm sorry, I said softly, but I'm no longer part of that arrangement. She was quiet for a long time. So, you're really gone. I left a note, I said. On the fridge. Remember? A sharp inhale. Your father said you're being cruel. Cruel? No, Cruel was watching her daughter pull double shifts and still asking her to grow up. Cruel was toasting one child while billing the other. Cruel was silence served for dinner when all you wanted was acknowledgement. Tell Dad I learned cruelty from the best. Click. By the end of the month, they had defaulted on the electricity bill. My cousin messaged me again. They lit candles at dinner. Your dad's blaming the economy. But we all know he gambled his pride and lost. The car? Repossessed. My brother? Fired from his job after skipping too many shifts. The rent? Late for the 3rd time. And I? I was sitting in my own living room, floors swept, tea steaming, sunlight stretching across the rug, freelance projects stacked in a folder labeled Freedom Fund. But the real win came when I received a letter. An official one. From the National Talent Program I'd applied to in secret, the one that offered 6-month mentorships in Lisbon for writers. I opened it slowly, half expecting a rejection. Instead, congratulations, Lena. You've been selected. I sat there frozen. Not from disbelief, but from confirmation. Because they spent years making me question my voice. And now, it was taking me across the world. That night, I didn't call anyone. No celebration posts. No story updates. I sat on the floor, lit one candle, wrote my acceptance email. Then I pulled out the note I had left on the fridge that night. Don't worry about the rent. I won't be here Sunday. Or ever again. I rewrote it. New ink. New message. Don't worry about my silence. I found something better than your approval. I found myself. The next morning, I received one last message. From my brother. You've proven your point. Mom's been crying. Dad doesn't speak your name anymore. But I remember how much you did for us. I see it now. I really do. I'm sorry. I stared at that message. Then closed my phone. Because forgiveness doesn't require re-entry. And I wasn't going backward. The collapse had begun. But for once, I wasn't the one buried underneath it. I was already flying above. I never told them I was leaving the country.
I didn't know them that.
The last time I told them my dreams, they weaponized them, turned every ambition into selfishness, every goal into guilt. So this time, I packed my passport in silence, boarded the flight with a smile they'd never seen, and left the continent without telling a soul. Lisbon was softer than I imagined. The streets were cobbled and old, like history whispered beneath your feet. My apartment was small, a fifth-floor walk-up with squeaky stairs and paint-chipped walls. But I loved it. It was mine. No one knocked at midnight asking for money. No one left dirty dishes in the sink and called it teamwork. No sticky notes demanding rent. No cold toasts that skipped my name. Just me. And a view of the orange rooftops that looked like freedom. The mentorship was intense. Writers from every background. Some came from money. Others came from trauma. But all of us shared one thing. We had stories that survived the people who tried to silence them. I wrote like I was on fire. Short essays. Memoirs. Spoken word. And every piece, without exception, was laced with the girl I used to be. The one who passed dishes at family dinners without being thanked. The one who was told her art wasn't a real job. The one who left a note on a fridge like it was the final chapter. But this was the sequel. One afternoon, after a performance, a guest speaker approached me. He was a publisher. Well known. Sharp eyes. Kind smile. You don't write for attention, he said. You write for truth. I'd like to talk about a book deal. I almost dropped my coffee. We met later that week. He offered a small advance. Modest but real. Enough to say, you were never crazy. You were just unheard. I shared the news with my mentor, Ana, a Brazilian poet who had built her career on resilience. She held my hands, tears in her eyes, and said, "Your silence made space for your voice." It hit me then. All those nights my family asked me, "Why are you so quiet?" They thought I was mute, but I was just watching, learning, collecting. And now, I wasn't just speaking. I was being heard. A week before my final presentation, I received a package. No return address. Just my name. Inside was a single envelope. And a photo. The photo was of the old house. But it was empty. Windows shuttered. Curtains gone. A "for sale" sign leaning against the gate like a fallen crown. Inside the envelope was a note.
Typed.
We sold the house.
Couldn't keep up without you.
We thought you were the fragile one. Turns out, you were the pillar.
Dad.
I stared at it. Not with pain, but with clarity. They hadn't just lost a daughter. They lost the structure. The spine.
The soul.
Because, while they lifted my brother on a pedestal, I held the ground beneath their feet. And when I walked away, the whole thing crumbled. Not out of revenge, but because it had never been built to last without me. I folded the note, burned it in the sink, and whispered, "Now rebuild yourselves." Because I already had. The first print run sold out in 4 days. Fridge Notes wasn't just a book, it became a mirror. For every daughter who paid bills in silence. For every woman who carried a family on her back and was still told she wasn't enough. Messages poured in. "Your story is mine. Thank you for writing what I was too scared to say." I left a note too. Mine said, "Don't wait up." I never went back. My mother made me feel like I owed her my life. I'm finally taking it back. Each message was a seed. And suddenly, I was walking through a garden I never expected to bloom. Publishers from Brazil, Argentina, and Portugal started calling. They wanted translations, panels, readings.
Rights.
I was flown to Sao Paulo for a book festival. The city I once left in silence was now printing my words on posters. People stood in line to hear the story they once ignored. But the biggest moment came during a live radio interview. A journalist leaned into the mic and asked, casually, "Have your family reached out? I mean, it's bold, writing something so personal. Don't they feel exposed?" I paused. Not because I didn't have an answer, but because I did. "You can't expose what was already visible," I said. "I didn't destroy their reputation." They handed it to me, folded neatly in rent receipts and empty dinner chairs. The room fell silent. Even a host blinked, then nodded slowly. "Well, that answers that." A week later, I received a package. No return address again. Inside was a copy of Fridge Notes. My own book, dog-eared, highlighted, notes in the margins, and a post-it on the first page, written in the same scratchy handwriting I grew up seeing on grocery lists. "I didn't know you were watching me so closely. I thought I was raising you to survive. I see now I raised you to leave. Maybe one day, you'll forgive me for making you strong the wrong way."
Dad. I stared at that note for a long time.
Forgiveness? It's a complicated thing. It doesn't come with fanfare. It doesn't mean returning. Sometimes, it just means not bleeding when their name comes up. And as I placed the book on my shelf, I whispered, "I don't need an apology to be free. I just need it not to hurt anymore." Later that month, I launched a digital community, the Note Project, a platform where women and men could share their own fridge notes. Stories of betrayal, silence, escape, and rebirth. Some were brutal, others were small, a quiet goodbye written in lipstick on a bathroom mirror. A resignation letter slipped under a locked door. The project went viral. People weren't just reading. They were healing.
And me?
I watched it all unfold, humbled and whole, because I thought leaving that house meant losing my place in the world. But it gave me the power to build one. One evening, Anna, my mentor, called me. "I read the message from your father," she said. "How do you feel?" I looked out the window. Lisbon's lights twinkled below. Like he finally sees me. "Do you want to write him back?" I shook my head. I already did. Every word of that book was my answer. Because the greatest revenge is not rage. It's recognition. And now, even the people who once told me I had nothing to say were reading every line. The theater was packed. Students, mentors, publishers, locals who had read the flyer and wandered in. The lights were low, the mic crackled, and somewhere in the back row, I swore I could feel the ghost of who I used to be, nervous, quiet, praying to just disappear. But not tonight. Tonight, I was the final reader. I walked to the center of the stage. No notes. No fear. Just a voice they never clapped for, now ready to make the entire room breathe differently. "My name is Lena," I began, the words clear, steady. And I told the truth. Not the version wrapped in politeness, the real one. About the dinner toast where only my brother was seen. About the 800 reais demanded like rent from a guest. About the fridge note, the night I disappeared, and the attic of silence they forced me into for years. I spoke of being useful instead of loved, obedient instead of valued. I told them I wasn't broken when I left. I was finally whole. By the time I finished, the room was frozen.
Still.
Reverent. Then, an eruption of applause. Not polite. Powerful. Some stood. Others cried. One woman mouthed, "Thank you," as I stepped down. And in that moment I realized I was never hard to love. They just never made the effort. Backstage, my mentor Anna hugged me so tightly I could barely breathe. That wasn't just writing. That was truth carved into wood. She handed me an envelope. From the publisher. "Your official contract. They're calling the book Fridge Notes." I blinked. "What?" "They said your final piece cracked something open. Said it's going to speak to women across the globe. Stories like yours," she added. "They don't fade. They ignite." I held the envelope like it was a birth certificate for the version of me that finally existed. The version they tried to bury beneath rent slips and passive-aggressive scoldings. But truth? It doesn't rot. It roots. Later that night, I sat alone in my Lisbon apartment.
Cup of tea.
Window cracked open. City lights blinking like a slow applause. I opened my laptop. And against my better judgment, I logged into the old family group chat. Still active. Still full of pictures. But the tone had shifted. No more car selfies. No more toast videos. Just pictures of boxes. Moving vans. Quiet rooms. And one message from my brother, posted last week. If anyone hears from Lena, tell her I miss her. I hovered over the reply button. Then closed the app. Some people don't deserve closure through a screen. Especially when they never gave you a seat at the table. Instead, I wrote a letter. Not to them.
To me.
I folded it. Slipped it inside the first copy of my manuscript. And it read, Dear Lena, they thought you disappeared. But you just became visible to the right people. You didn't run. You rose. And one day, when they tell your story, let them know you built your life from the silence they left you in. Because now, I wasn't the daughter in the corner. I wasn't the sister who paid rent while others partied. I was Lena, writer, survivor, and the loudest voice to ever leave a house that tried to mute her. I didn't plan to return to Brazil. Not out of fear, but because I no longer needed a stage in the place that once made me invisible. But when the Note Project partnered with a literacy foundation in Sao Paulo and invited me to speak, I said yes.
Not to see them.
To see myself where I began, where I was buried, and where I bloomed anyway. I landed on a Thursday. Cool breeze, gray sky. The city hadn't changed much. But I had. I didn't stay with family. I booked a hotel near the venue. Clean, quiet, safe. I sent no messages. No hints. No invitations. This wasn't a reunion. It was a reclamation. The event was held at a university library. Young girls filled the seats. Women in their 40s and 50s stood in the back, clutching books like lifelines. Some had tears in their eyes before I even said a word. Today, I began, I speak not as the daughter who disappeared, but as the woman who learned how to exist without being approved. I told them everything. About the dinner where the only name they toasted was not mine. About the note on the fridge. About the silence. About the attic-sized apartment that taught me freedom. About Lisbon. The book. The letters. The grief. The rise. When I finished, a girl in the front row stood up. Maybe 17. Her voice trembled. How do you love people who only love the version of you that stays small? I looked her in the eyes and said, You don't. You love yourself big enough that you don't shrink to fit back in. The room clapped, but she was already crying. I stepped down, held her, and whispered, I was you. I promise. And you're allowed to outgrow their expectations. After the event, I walked past my old neighborhood. I didn't stop, just observed. The house still stood. Different color, different tenants, curtains drawn. And then, across the street, I saw him. My father.
Sitting on a bench.
Alone. Reading fridge notes. He didn't notice me at first. His eyes moved slowly, like the words were bricks he dropped long ago and now had to lift one by one. I could have walked away, but I crossed the street, stood in front of him. His eyes lifted, and for the first time in my entire life, he looked at me without judgment. Lena. Hello, Dad. Silence. He gestured to the book, eyes wet. This is all true? I didn't flinch. Every word. He looked down. I told myself we were helping you grow. You were building walls, I said, and calling it parenting. He nodded slowly, then handed me something. A small envelope. Inside, the final rent note I left on the fridge. I kept it, he said. I hated it, but I kept it. Why? Because it was the first time you chose yourself. And I didn't know how to forgive you for it. But I've since realized you shouldn't need forgiveness for becoming who you are. I didn't say much. I didn't need to. The pain was there, but not sharp anymore.
Just dull history.
We parted, without promises. No forced hug. Just truth standing in the open air. That night, I read back the final pages of my book. And I knew. I wasn't returning to the past. I was just closing it properly. I flew back to Lisbon 2 days later. No dramatic goodbyes. No secret tears. Just peace. The kind you carry when you finally stop waiting for people to choose you and choose yourself instead. My father didn't call. My mother never showed. My brother sent a short message. I read it.
The book.
I didn't know. I'm sorry. That was it. And honestly, that was enough. Because I had spent too many years begging for sentences when I was always writing chapters. Back in my apartment, I placed the final copy of Fridge Notes on the shelf, not with pride, but with stillness. The kind of stillness you only earn after surviving storms no one else even saw. The window was cracked, Lisbon air drifting in, and I realized, the girl who once scribbled her last words on a sticky note by the fridge, she had written a book that was now translated in 7 languages. She had helped women leave abusive marriages, students walk out of suffocating homes, sons confront silence, mothers find their daughters again. She had lit a fire across continents. With one note. The following week, a journalist came to interview me for a global feature titled, Women Who Changed the Narrative. He asked, near the end, "Do you regret not going back? Not staying to fix it?" I laughed softly. You don't fix a cracked foundation by repainting the walls. He paused, nodded, then asked, "And the girl who left the note on the fridge, what would you tell her now?" I leaned back, stared at the ceiling, and whispered, "You were brave. You didn't disappear. You finally appeared." The article went live. The messages doubled. But I didn't get swept up in the noise. Because the real reward wasn't fame, wasn't money, wasn't the applause. It was the version of myself I woke up next to every day, whole, heard, home. 6 months later, I opened a residency program for young writers. Free lodging, weekly mentorship, therapy access. I called it the fridge. Because sometimes you leave a note behind when no one listens, and years later, the world writes you back. On opening night, I read one final passage from Fridge Notes. They asked me why I never came back. I told them I didn't leave out of anger. I left because they made love feel like a receipt. And I was tired of paying to exist. I looked up. Dozens of young women were crying. And in the front row, that same 17-year-old girl from the Sao Paulo event. She had flown in, used her savings, came alone. After I finished, she came up and said, "I left my house last month. Left a note. Same as you." She handed me a photo of it. For words, "This is not love." I hugged her tightly, because I knew she'd just written her first chapter. Now, when people ask me how I found my strength, I say, they tried to make me small, but the silence they forced on me, I turned it into sentences. And one sticky note became a revolution. Because I was never the failure at that dinner table. I was the one who turned a quiet exit into a global entrance.